I think there is something eternally enduring about the appeal of authoritarianism within the human instinct. I think we all know that we just want our own way, no matter what. I think we're all prone to cherry picking. I mean, if I'm making an argument, I always have to really make a point of being fair and steel manning the other point of view before I criticize it, because I think you have to kind of train it, because it's much easier, isn't it, to just pick the worst things your enemies have said and construct an argument on the basis of that. Very easy, and it's satisfying, and we enjoy it. But it is it's slightly dishonest. It's misrepresentative. And I think if you take, for instance, in America, whichever side, we've seen it from Republicans and Democrats, they always call into question the validity of the other person's leadership. They always say, they've lost sight of that thing called the loser's consent. When you lose an election, you accept it. We had the same with Brexit. After Brexit, we had our own parliament, trying to overturn the result, overturn the will of the biggest mandate in political history in the UK. So people aren't willing to, and that's, of course, it's anti-democratic. The whole principle is anti-democratic. I think what's happening with Trump at the moment, same thing. That is not a legitimate case. It should, it's absolutely clear to me. I think irrespective of where you stand on whether you support Trump or despise Trump, but when you elevate a misdemeanor to a misdemeanor that's beyond the statute of limitations to a felony by some contortions, by this kind of jiggery pokery, the DA there, Alvin Bragg, doesn't even have federal jurisdiction. He has state jurisdiction, but he's bringing in this notion of a federal crime, attaching it to a misdemeanor that's out of date. It's dodgy stuff. And of course, that's hugely anti-democratic to try and imprison your opponent. Now, they claim, but what all of the people that have been talking about this, all of the Democrats, have been saying Trump is the threat to democracy, right? Now, I don't like Trump denying the result of an election, just outright brazenly asserting that he won and doing all of that kind of thing, or screaming about Hillary, lock her up.
Yeah.
There is a difference, though. He didn't actually do it. There's a lot of bluster going on there. Once the political parties start criminalizing their opponents, everyone will do this. If the Democrats think the Republicans won't do this when they're in charge, they absolutely must be kidding themselves, because we already know that the DOJ let Biden off on the grounds that he's too doddery and old, and therefore they didn't proceed with the prosecution. Well, what happens when there's a Republicans in the White House? It changes then. So I think, and so it's people projecting, accusing the others of the thing that they're guilty of themselves. And I think there's something instinctive about that. And when you combine that with the instinct to just want your opponents to go away, like, for instance, when Elon Musk says he wants to ban anyone who calls someone cis, he says it's a slur on Twitter. I'm not comfortable with that. I think the word cis, I think it's a nonsense word. Yeah. And I think it's an ideological word, and I hate that it's being used by schools and the NHS over here and government bodies. It's got no business. They may as well, they're using religious terminology in what should be a secular organization, right? I oppose all of that. And of course, if you ban all the people who use that word, then my timeline would be cleaned up wonderfully. You get rid of all of these awful people who.
But how boring!
It's boring, but it's also not right. I'd still believe in freedom of speech, and particularly for speech I don't like. So yeah, I think it's that. I suppose I've answered it, but I think it's that combination of people accusing others of what they're guilty of themselves is the main thing, I think.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I'm with you. I mean, I don't want to why would I want to ban cis from Twitter? Like, it's totally unnecessary. I would much rather talk about or debate the term, but it's I don't think it's at all helpful, and then we just look like a bunch of hypocrites.
Also, we've got facts on our side. So I want to have the debate about the trans issue. I had a trans activist on my show who was kind enough to come on the show and good enough to come on the show. So I'm having a go. But I asked the question, what do you mean by gender identity? And the answer was the essence of male or female. Well, there you've said it. Now we know what you mean. You mean your soul. You're talking about a soul. And it's great because I didn't say it. You said it. And that wouldn't happen if the person wasn't there. So banning the people who disagree with me isn't going to help, particularly because on this issue, I've thought and read a lot about it, and I've read a lot of their arguments about it. And I know their arguments don't stand up to scrutiny, but the thing is, they know it too. And that's why their instinct is to ban. That they have to. That's the only way this gets sustained. That's what cancel culture, that's why I think cancel culture is largely exacerbated so much, because that's their only recourse. Ruin your lives, make sure there's a message sent out that no one wants to challenge them, right? Bullying, in other words, works. But yeah, those on other sides of the debate shouldn't be doing it. I mean, I've seen some gender critical feminists talking about they want to discriminate when it comes to employment and housing and against people who identify as trans. How does that help? That's not I've been piled on by both sides of this argument, mostly by trans activists. I had a pile on from gender critical feminists, and I have to say it's a minority. They don't behave, the trans activists send death threats and all sorts of stuff like that. The gender critical, I've never seen that from gender critical feminists, but there is a small amount who are insistent that everyone thinks exactly the same way as them. They have this kind of sense of moral purity. And I had this case recently where I had made the point, I have known people who identify as trans. I've had people within my friendship circles who have identified as trans. And I made the point that on some circumstances, when I'm talking to someone who isn't a gender ideologue in the privacy of my own home, I've referred to that person using the pronouns they wanted. That's what I said. I don't do it as a reporter. I don't do it on my channel. I don't do it in public, and I don't do it when I'm talking to or about gender ideologues. But I have done it about people I know personally for personal reasons, for the reasons that I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Now, a lot of people did come on and say, look, I disagree with this because I think once you do this, it normalizes this kind of thing, and that can lead to danger. That's a good argument. And that's an argument I was willing to have. But a couple of activists, there was one in particular who came swooping in with a big following saying, you hate children, you want to harm children, you want to harm women. It's like, why didn't you just say, I don't know you, but I disagree with you about this. Can we have a conversation? Why did you swoop in with this these vile accusations? And it can only be that there is a sense of moral purity and righteousness from a small group of gender critical feminists that effectively mirrors what the trans activists do. Because I don't think this is specific to any movement. I think that idea of moral purity and hatred for anyone who thinks differently, who has a different view, you find it everywhere, I think. And that's and I despair when it comes from gender critical people, because you've got the winning argument. That's my point. You've got the win. Have the argument, have the moral high ground, be willing to have the discussions, because if you do, you'll win. That I did, can you think of a single example when a trans rights activist has been in an open debate and they've won it? The fact that we're having all these court cases in the UK is brilliant, because they're on the stand and they can't just say, if you ask me that question, you're a transphobe. If you ask me that question, you're hateful. They have to answer the question. And when they're forced to answer the question, it falls apart completely and gloriously. And so just rely on that, I think. Am I making sense there?